The obese bride was left at the station, the Apache giant. Said, "You'll ride with me." The noon train hissed into the Dry Creek station with a long, angry sigh, steam rolling across the platform like a curtain that couldn't quite hide the staring eyes, because everyone already knew the story before the wheels even stopped. The obese bride from Kansas City had come west to marry a rancher she'd never met, and half the town had gathered just to see whether the rumors about her size were true. So when the steam cleared and she stepped down, dress wrinkled from the long ride, cheeks pink with heat, eyes nervous but hopeful, the platform fell into a hush sharp enough to cut, followed by snickers that spread like brush fire. Some men smirked, some women whispered behind gloved hands, and a boy called out, "Is the groom going to need 2 horses for her?" Which sent a ripple of laughter up the line of onlookers while she kept her eyes fixed on the dirt, one hand gripping the small suitcase whose handle dug painfully into her palm. Her name was Lottie Mae. 23, soft-spoken, soft-bodied, and soft-hearted in a world that prized sharp things, but she'd saved every cent for this journey, written letters full of hope to a man named Wade Harlan who'd promised her a new life, a home, and a chance to be cherished. Yet the platform remained empty except for the crowd that came to feast on her disappointment. The station master cleared his throat politely. "Ma'am, your fella running late?" She forced a smile. He must be." But inside her chest, something already sagged. Minutes crawled. The crowd grew restless. A group of ranch hands made bets on whether the groom had fallen asleep drunk or simply seen her picture and run for the hills. Lottie tried to keep her breathing steady, tried to remember the lines she'd practiced in her head for weeks. "Hello, Wade. Thank you for choosing me." But every second scraped away another piece of her hope. The train whistle shrieked again, ready to pull away, and the station master shifted awkwardly. "Ma'am, he ain't comin'." A woman in a blue shawl muttered, "Poor thing, should have known no man would show." A man added, "He probably took one look at the description and bolted." The laughter returned, quiet, cruel, like a knife stropped on shame, and Lottie's eyes filled, though she tried to blink it back because she'd promised herself she would not cry, not here, not in front of people who wanted exactly that. The station master touched her shoulder gently. "You can ride back on the evening train, miss. I'll help arrange it." She nodded, throat tight, and bent to pick up her suitcase, but her fingers slipped from the handle when she heard the hooves, slow, rhythmic, heavy, approaching from the far end of town. The crowd turned. Conversation died mid-breath. A giant Apache rider emerged through the dust, tall even astride the massive paint horse beneath him, shoulders broad as barn doors, hair braided with bone and turquoise, a red ochre stripe across his cheek that meant warrior to some and danger to most. He carried himself with a calm that made space for silence. The wind itself seemed to pause out of respect. He reined in beside the platform and looked down at Lottie, not at her size, not at her trembling hands, not at the suitcase she couldn't lift, just at her, seeing her with a clarity that felt like sunlight on a locked room. His voice, when he spoke, rumbled like distant thunder. "Why do they mock you?" She startled, wiping her face. My groom didn't show." The warrior glanced at the crowd, eyes narrowing like a blade being sharpened. "They laugh at a woman left alone?" No one answered. The station master swallowed hard. "She was supposed to be claimed today." The Apache giant leaned forward in his saddle, gaze fixed on Lottie until her breath trembled. "And is she a burden?" he asked the crowd. "Is she unworthy?" The silence grew brittle. A ranch hand snorted, "Just look at her." But he didn't finish, because the warrior turned his head with such a cold, sharp promise of violence that the man's mouth snapped shut. Then the giant swung one leg over, dismounted in a fluid motion that shook the dust loose from the earth, and walked toward Lottie with steps so steady the platform boards stopped creaking. When he reached her, he took her suitcase in one hand as if it weighed no more than a feather, then lifted his gaze to the station master. "She will not ride back alone." Lottie's lips parted. "Sir, you don't even know me." He studied her, not with pity, but with certainty. "I know they left you," he said, "and I do not leave what others throw away." The crowd's silence deepened into shock. He straightened, voice carrying across every stoop and rail of the station. "You will ride with me." Lottie felt her heart thud so hard it shook her ribs. No man had ever said such words to her, not gently, not proudly, not as though she deserved them. And as the sun caught the warrior's braids and the dust settled around his boots, the laughter that had filled the platform turned into something else entirely. Awe, maybe fear, maybe respect, but unmistakably the beginning of a story Dry Creek Station would never forget. Lottie Mae stood frozen on the platform, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and terror as the Apache giant lifted her suitcase with effortless strength and turned toward the road, his shadow swallowing hers as he waited for her to follow, and every eye in Dry Creek Station clung to them like burrs on wool, some in shock, some in judgment, some in a dawning understanding that the scene unfolding in front of them was no ordinary act of frontier kindness, but something deeper, something that would be retold in whispers long after dusk. Yet Lottie couldn't move, rooted by humiliation and fear and the memory of Wade Harlan's soft-spoken promises that had now shattered like cheap glass under a boot heel. "Sir, please," she managed, her voice barely more than a frayed thread. "You don't have to do this." The giant glanced back at her, a slight furrow in his brow as if he genuinely didn't understand the refusal. "A woman left is a woman wounded," he said, "and a wounded person must not walk alone." His English was accented, soft but firm, each word placed with intention. "Come." But the weight in her limbs didn't budge. Dry Creek's laughter still echoed in her ears, and she felt their stares clawing at her back even now. "They'll talk," she whispered. "They already talk." He looked around at the crowd, men pretending not to stare, women with pinched mouths, boys swallowing their leftover mockery, and something cold and ancient flashed in his eyes. "Let them," he said. "Their tongues are small, their courage smaller." A few men bristled at that, but nobody stepped forward. Nobody wanted to test a warrior whose calm settled around him like a storm deciding it didn't need thunder to be feared. Lottie swallowed and took a hesitant step forward, and the boards groaned under her weight. A sound she'd heard all her life when she walked across wooden floors, a sound that summoned every childhood shame, every whispered remark about her size, every dress she couldn't fit into, every suitor who'd told her she had a pleasant face, as if that were a consolation. She felt eyes dart toward the creek, saw a pair of girls snicker behind their hands, and her shoulders hunched, breath shaking. The giant's gaze snapped toward the sound, with a look so sharp the girls jumped and backed up. Then he extended a hand. Not touching her, just offering, palm open, steady as a mountain. "You walk beside me," he said. "Not behind." That sentence alone stole the breath from her lungs. Men didn't say things like that to her. Men didn't even see her, not truly. She stared at his hand, then at the crowd, then at the horse, a massive creature with a coat like thunderclouds before rain. "I don't know how to ride well," she murmured. "Then I will guide the horse." "I'm heavy," she whispered, cheeks burning. "It will carry you," he said simply. "And so will I." She looked at him sharply, but he wasn't smiling or teasing. He meant it with a sincerity so clean it made her eyes sting. Slowly, she placed her shaking hand in his, and his fingers wrapped around hers with a gentleness that didn't match the size of him. The crowd murmured louder now, confused, wary, astonished. One man muttered, "She's lucky. Apache'll probably trade her for a rifle." Lottie flinched, but the giant turned so quickly the air snapped. He stared the man down until the rancher paled and stepped back, hand drifting toward his holster before thinking better of it. "Do not speak of her again," the warrior said, voice low and lethal. "Not her name, not her weight, not her worth. If you do, I will hear it." The station master cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, may I ask your name?" The giant didn't look away from Lottie. "Tahonri," he said, "son of Yuma, last rider of the Red Grove." A hush fell. The Red Grove Apache were known across 3 territories, peaceful until threatened, loyal until betrayed, and fierce enough to silence whole towns when they chose to stand tall. Lottie's pulse hammered as Tahonri guided her toward the horse. "Up you go," he murmured. She hesitated. "I'll break the saddle." "No," he said, eyes warm with something she couldn't name. "You will not." He cupped his hands and lifted her with surprising ease, settling her onto the horse as though placing something precious, not burdensome. The leather groaned under her weight, but the horse did not flinch. It merely shifted and breathed, steady and patient. Taonri climbed up behind her, not pressed close, but close enough she felt his presence like a shelter at her back. Where are we going?" she asked. He took the reins in one hand, keeping her steady with the other. "Away from the ones who left you," he said, "toward the ones who will not." As the horse stepped forward and the crowd parted like water around a ship's hull, Lottie kept her gaze straight ahead, fighting tears, fighting disbelief, fighting the strange, warm feeling rising inside her chest, something she hadn't felt in years: safety, dignity, and maybe the beginning of being wanted, not as a burden, but as a person worth choosing. They rode out of Dry Creek Station under a sky-bleached pale by the afternoon sun, the heat shimmering over the dirt road like a veil drawn between Lottie and the town that had just finished laughing at her. And though her heart thudded with every hoofbeat, she didn't dare look back, not at the platform where Wade Harlan had abandoned her, not at the cluster of faces still whispering, not at the boys whose jeers still rang in her ears. Because turning around would mean letting their cruelty live inside her, and she was so tired of giving strangers permission to carve their opinions into her bones. Tahonri guided the horse with silent confidence, his broad chest a steady warmth at her back, his breath calm, unhurried, as though he were escorting a queen instead of a girl no one had wanted 5 minutes earlier. The road curved toward open prairie, the scent of sagebrush thickening in the warm air, and Lottie felt the knot in her throat loosen slightly when the sound of the station finally faded behind them. She dared a small breath, but the shame was still raw, still crawling over her skin like ants, her dress pinching her waist, the sleeves too tight, her hair frizzed from the train, her entire body heavy with exhaustion and humiliation. "You okay?" Tahonri asked, his voice low and steady, vibrating through her shoulders. She nodded quickly, though tears pricked her eyes. I'm fine. Thank you for helping." "You were alone," he said simply. "No one should be alone when left behind." The words wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and impossible to shrug off. She swallowed. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You were promised a horse ride to a husband. Instead, you were given laughter." Her eyes blurred at the memory. "I shouldn't have come. It was foolish." "No," he said. "It was brave." Brave. No one had ever called her that. Not once. Not when she'd left Kansas. Not when she'd shown up at the station with hope stitched into her bones like thread. Brave. The word lodged in her chest, painful and beautiful at the same time. She shifted slightly in the saddle, self-conscious. "I must look ridiculous," she whispered. "I don't fit in this dress or on this horse or in this town." Tahonri let the reins slacken, letting the horse slow to a walk. "You are not ridiculous." She kept her eyes on her hands, twisting the fabric of her skirt. "Everyone saw how heavy I am." "I saw a woman standing alone," he said. "That is heavier than anything on your body." Lottie covered her mouth to hold back a sob. No man had ever spoken to her like this, not gently, not kindly, not without mockery hiding underneath the words. She whispered, Why'd you help me?" He took a slow breath. "Because once, in my tribe, a girl was left behind. She was not small. She was not loud, but she was kind. And no one claimed her when raiders came." Lottie's breath hitched. What happened to her? "She died alone," he said quietly. "I was a boy and could not protect her. I do not make that mistake again." Lottie stared at the horizon so her tears wouldn't fall onto his hands. His voice softened. "You remind me of her, strong, gentle, braver than men who mock you." Her chest tightened, this time from something warm, not wounding. They rode farther into the prairie until Dry Creek was nothing more than a smear of dust behind them. Birds circled overhead. A creek glittered in the distance. The wind tugged at Lottie's hair, cooling her hot cheeks. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "To my people first," Tahonri said. "They will give you food, water, safety." "Your tribe?" she echoed, alarm sparking. "They won't want me there. I don't belong." "You belong wherever you are not mocked," he said, "where you are welcomed. That is all belonging means." She didn't have an answer, not for that, Not for him, not for the strange, powerful calm that settled in her chest the farther they rode from the voices that judged her. After a long stretch of silence, Taonri spoke again. "When we reach camp, you will rest. Then we decide what you want to do." "What? I want?" she repeated, stunned. No one ever asked her that, not her family, not Wade Harlan, not the world. "Yes," he said. "Where you want to go, who you want to be. No one owns your path." Lottie breathed out slowly, realizing no one had ever given her permission to choose anything, not even her own happiness. As the prairie opened wide and the sun dipped low, casting warm gold across Tahonri's face and the horse's mane, she felt something shift inside her. Not confidence, not yet, but the first fragile spark of dignity returning. And for the first time since she stepped off that train, she wondered if being left behind wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning. By the time the sun slid low enough to paint the prairie in copper light, the land around them began to change, the endless open grass giving way to scattered juniper, the smell of smoke drifting faintly through the evening air, and Lottie's pulse fluttered as Tahonri guided the horse toward a small basin tucked between two ridges, where dozens of canvas lodges circled a central fire, like stars gathered around a single flame. She stiffened instinctively, panic prickling her skin because she'd heard plenty of stories, some true, some fear-mongering, about Apache camps. And though Tahonri's calm presence anchored her, she couldn't stop the wave of self-conscious dread rising in her throat. She wasn't dressed for this place, wasn't shaped for this world, wasn't sure she belonged anywhere at all. Especially not here among warriors and riders whose movements were quiet, as shadows and strong as stone. But Tahonri sensed her tension before she spoke, placing a steady hand at her waist to help her down. "Do not fear," he murmured. "My people do not judge by the shape of the body." "Everyone judges," she whispered, eyes downcast. "You do not know them yet," he said, and his certainty pressed into her ribs like a reassuring weight. When her feet hit the ground, she nearly stumbled, legs wobbling from the long ride, but Tahonri caught her elbow as though he'd expected it, keeping her upright until she steadied. Several women approached first, not men, not warriors, but older women with long braids streaked in gray and faces lined from sun and laughter rather than bitterness. And Lottie braced herself for the stares, the whispers, the silent verdict she'd grown used to. But the first woman, tall and lean with warm brown eyes, simply looked at her as one looks at a weary traveler. Assessing need, not worth. She spoke to Tahonri in Apache, and Lottie flinched when he answered, his tone respectful. The woman nodded, then placed a gentle hand on Lottie's arm. "Come," she said in accented English. "Sit. You're tired." Lottie's throat tightened. You're not bothered by me?" she whispered, voice cracking. The woman blinked. "Bothered?" She shook her head lightly. "You're safe? That's all." Safe. The word hit harder than any insult the town had thrown at her. She let them guide her to the fire, where a young girl placed a blanket around her shoulders, and an older man passed her a wooden bowl of stew. For a moment, she hesitated, expecting someone to snicker or watch her eat, but when she lifted the spoon and took a trembling bite, no eyes clung to her, no whispers followed. The stew was warm and rich, and it sank into her stomach like comfort she hadn't known in years. Tahonri sat across from her, not too close, not looming, just present, a steady mountain anchored at her horizon. The older woman who'd first greeted her spoke quietly. "He brings no strangers without purpose," she said, nodding at Tahonri. "You have been wronged." Lottie looked down at her hands. "Yes, very badly." "Then you heal here first." Lottie's eyes stung again. She didn't deserve this kindness, not yet. After a long silence, she asked, "They're not upset I'm here. I'm different." The older woman chuckled. "Everyone here is different. That is why we stay together." She motioned toward the warriors sharpening spears, toward the children chasing each other between tents, toward the young mothers tending fires. "We are not like the towns. We do not measure humans in pounds or shadows." A tear slipped down Lottie's cheek. She wiped it fast, but the woman touched her hand gently. "Cry if you must. You lost something today." A husband, Lottie said bitterly. A liar, Tahonri corrected, his voice deep but calm. A man like that is not a husband. Lottie looked up at him, and something in her chest cracked open, something fragile and painful and old. Why did he leave me? Tahonri's gaze held hers without flinching. Because he is small. You are not. She covered her face with both hands, choking on a sob she'd tried to swallow for hours. Tahonri didn't reach out, didn't intrude, just watched her carefully, respectfully, like a warrior guarding the space around her while she broke. The older woman placed a hand on Lottie's back. You sleep here tonight, she said. Tomorrow you choose your path. Lottie breathed shakily. Path? You go back east if you wish, or stay, or go to find a new town. The world is large. Tahonri nodded. You choose, not others. She drew in a long breath, tasting wood smoke and dusk, feeling the fire warm her cheeks. For the first time in years, her sighs didn't feel like a curse. It felt irrelevant, as if she were simply human. She looked at Tahonri across the fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes, and whispered, not quite believing her own voice. Thank you for not letting me be alone. The giant warrior inclined his head. No one left in the dust should walk without a guide. And as night settled over the camp, Lottie felt something shift quietly inside her, a faint, trembling realization that the world might still hold places where she wasn't a burden, but a person worth protecting. Lottie Mae woke before dawn, the camp still wrapped in moon-silver quiet, the embers of last night's fire glowing like sleepy eyes in the ash, and for the first time since stepping off the train, she felt her chest rise without the usual weight of dread pressing it back down. She'd slept on a thick buffalo hide inside a warm canvas lodge, listening to the soft breathing of the Apache women around her, and no one had stared or snickered or whispered about her size. Not once, not even when she struggled to settle comfortably or when her breath hitched during the night. At sunrise, the camp stirred awake around her, children chasing each other between tents, men preparing horses, women grinding corn or tending fires, and through the soft orange glow, Lottie saw Tahonri emerging from the shadows near the ridge, carrying 2 water skins and moving with the quiet certainty of a man who didn't need attention to command respect. When he reached her, he handed her one of the skins without ceremony. Drink, he said. The trail yesterday took more from you than you let show. She drank gratefully, wiping her mouth as the early sun warmed the prairie. Your people are kind, she murmured, kinder than I deserve. Deserve has nothing to do with kindness, he said. Kindness is chosen, not earned. Lottie looked away quickly, heart twisting at the simplicity of the truth. I feel like I should apologize for being here. They didn't invite me. I did, Tahonri answered. That is enough. She opened her mouth to protest, but a sudden shout cut the morning calm in half, sharp, panicked, coming from the northern ridge where 2 young riders galloped down toward camp, dust pluming behind their horses. Tahonri stiffened, instantly alert, hand drifting to the knife at his waist as the riders dismounted and spoke in rapid Apache, urgency carving lines into their faces. Lottie's stomach dropped at the sight. She didn't need to speak the language to recognize alarm. Tahonri's expression darkened. What's wrong? She whispered. He didn't look at her as he answered, voice low. Men are coming, white men, armed. Lottie's heart lurched painfully. Someone from town. Not riders from Dry Creek, he said. Strangers. Her throat tightened. Looking for me. Tahonri finally met her gaze. Yes. Her knees nearly buckled. Wade sent them, she breathed. He must have. The thought made her chest burn. After abandoning her publicly, after humiliating her, he'd sent riders? For what? To drag her back home in shame? To silence her? To claim she'd run away? The older woman from last night appeared at Lottie's side, placing a steadying hand on her back. What does your heart say? Lottie swallowed. My heart says Wade doesn't do anything unless it benefits Wade. If he sent riders, they're not coming for my well-being. Tahonri stepped closer. You know these men? If they're Wade's men, she said quietly, they're ranch hands, and they're loyal to his temper, not his conscience. Then we prepare, Tahonri said, but before he could issue orders, a thin whistle pierced the air, one used for signaling between scouts. Tahonri's head turned sharply toward the ridge. He murmured something under his breath, something that sounded like a prayer or a warning. Lottie trembled. "How many?" "3," he said. "But 3 men with guns can kill 10 unarmed." Lottie felt sick. "I don't want anyone hurt because of me." Henry shook his head. "You did nothing. But they'll blame you," she whispered, "or your people." "Let them blame," he said calmly. "We do not fear blame." Yet she could hear the tension behind his steadiness. This wasn't a small matter. The riders crested the ridge moments later, 3 silhouettes black against the rising sun, hats low, rifles slung across their backs. They rode with the arrogance of men who believed the land owed them something. Lottie's breath hitched when she recognized the lead rider, Colby Tate, Wade Harlan's foreman, a tall, wiry man with a nasty temper and a habit of spitting on women who didn't meet his standards. "Oh no," she whispered. Henry, that man hates me." A muscle in Henry's jaw twitched. Then he will learn a new emotion today. The riders halted at the edge of camp, their horses pawing the dirt, eyes sweeping over the Apache people with a mixture of discomfort and disdain. Colby raised a hand. "We're looking for a runaway bride," he called. Lottie flinched at the word runaway. Henry stepped forward, towering even from several yards away. "No runaway here," Colby snorted. "She's Wade's property." Something in the air snapped clean in half. Lottie felt it. Henry felt it. The entire camp felt it. The Apache warrior stepped between her and the riders, his shoulders widening, his presence terrifyingly calm as he replied, "She belongs to no man." Colby spat. "Wade paid for her ticket." "He did not pay for her life," Henry said, "or her dignity." Colby swung a leg off his horse, swaggering forward with the confidence of a man who had never once been challenged by someone bigger, or someone who could end him. "Hand her over," he said, "or this gets ugly." Lottie's heart pounded violently. In that moment she understood that yesterday's humiliation was nothing compared to what could happen now, that being left at the station might have been the safest moment of her week. But Henry didn't flinch, he didn't blink, he didn't waver. He simply raised his chin and said in a voice that made even the wind pause, "If you want her, you must take her from me." Colby smirked, resting a hand on his revolver. "Then move, Apache." Henry shook his head slowly, deliberately. "No," he said. "You will not take one more thing from a woman who has already lost too much." And as the rising sun set fire to the sky behind him, painting his silhouette in fierce gold, Lottie realized with a trembling breath that she was no longer just a burden or a bride abandoned. She was someone a giant was willing to stand in front of. Someone worth defending, someone worth a fight. Colby Tate's smirk widened as he took another swaggering step toward Henry, his boots grinding into the dry earth with a cocky rhythm that made Lottie's stomach twist, because she knew that walk, knew that arrogant swing of shoulders, knew that self-satisfied sneer. She'd seen it on men like him her whole life, the ones who sharpened their cruelty on women they thought beneath them and strutted through towns like kings of dust. Behind him, the other 2 riders shifted in their saddles, hands resting casually on their rifles, but their eyes flicked nervously between Henry and the Apache camp, because even the boldest cowhands understood that crossing a warrior from the Red Grove was like poking a sleeping cougar with a burning stick. Henry didn't move, didn't even breathe heavier, just stood rooted like an ancient cedar, silent and immovable, while Colby strutted closer, squaring up as if he had any business standing chest to chest with a man who towered half a head above him and carried the kind of strength that came from years of fighting mountains, not men. "Move aside," Colby repeated, curling his lip. "You don't know what you're tangling with." Henry's voice came low and even, the kind of calm that warned storms to step around him. "I know exactly. A man who mistakes cruelty for power." One of Colby's men muttered under his breath, "We should go," but Colby shot him a glare that shut him up fast. "Wade wants her home," Colby growled, jabbing a dirty finger toward Lottie. "He paid good money for her train papers, and he's not letting some overgrown tribesman steal his property." The word property made Lottie's lungs seize. She felt the shame rising again, clawing its way up her throat, but this time something else rose too. Anger, thick and hot and electric, twisting with humiliation until her fingers clenched into fists. Before she could speak, Henry's voice sliced through the air. She is not property. She's under my protection. Colby barked out a harsh laugh. Protection? From who? From folks who told her the truth? His eyes raked over Lottie with open contempt. Look at her. Wade did her a favor walking away. Man shouldn't be punished for refusing a wife who could snap his horse in two. A few Apache warriors bristled at the insult, rising from where they'd been sitting, hands tightening around spears and bows. The older woman who'd comforted Lottie last night stepped forward, eyes blazing. Your words shame only you, she said sharply. Colby spat on the ground. I've got every right to take her. No, Tahanri said, stepping fully between them now, shoulders squared like a shield forged from flesh and bone. You have no right at all. Colby touched the grip of his revolver. Last warning, move. The entire camp tensed. Children were pulled behind lodges, mothers crouched low, eyes darting between warriors. The wind held its breath. Then Lottie did something she never imagined herself capable of. She stepped forward. Colby Tate, she said, voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the morning air, you have no business speaking for me. And Wade doesn't own me. No man ever has. Colby's head snapped toward her, disbelief warping his features. You talk now? She swallowed hard. I always talked. Men like you just never listened. A murmur rippled through the camp. Tahanri turned his head slightly, watching her with a flicker of surprise, and something warmer, something like pride. Colby snorted. You think you're tough now that you've got a giant behind you? No, Lottie said softly. I think I'm tired of men treating me like I'm less than human. Her heart slammed painfully in her chest, but she didn't break eye contact. Wade didn't leave me because of my size. He left me because he's a coward. Tahanri's jaw tightened in approval. Colby's nostrils flared as he raised his gun a half-inch higher. You done? Yes, Lottie whispered. I'm done being silent. Tahanri stepped forward again, and when he spoke, the ground itself seemed to lean toward him. If you draw that weapon, he said, you will not leave this camp. Colby hesitated, but pride is a foolish master. He yanked the revolver free. Everything exploded at once. Apache warriors surged forward. Colby stumbled back. One of his men fired into the air in panic. Horses reared, children screamed, and Lottie felt her breath tear out of her chest as the world blurred into chaos. But Tahanri moved with the precision of lightning. 1 second he was beside her, the next he was on Colby, ripping the weapon from the foreman's hand and sending him crashing into the dirt so hard the ground itself seemed to grunt. Colby sprawled, coughing dust, his hat flying off as Tahanri planted a knee between his shoulder blades and twisted the gun free. Enough, Tahanri growled. The camp froze. Lottie's hands shook violently, but she forced herself forward. Let me speak to him, she said, breath ragged. Tahanri rose slowly, keeping the gun trained on the ranch hands. Colby glared up at her from the dirt. Wade ain't gonna forgive this, he snarled. Lottie kneeling, eyes steady. I didn't ask for his forgiveness, and I don't need his permission. She leaned closer, voice shaking but sure. You tell him this, I'm not coming back. Not now, not ever. Colby smirked a tired, arrogant smirk until she added, and you can also tell him Tahanri didn't steal me. I chose to walk away from a man who doesn't know how to value anything. The smirk vanished. Tahanri stepped beside her, towering, silent, protective. Go, he ordered the riders, and be glad your lives are not the ones left lying in the dust today. Colby scrambled to his feet, face purple with humiliation, and mounted his horse. This ain't over, he spat. It is, Lottie said quietly. For me. And as the riders retreated down the ridge, the camp watched Lottie, not with pity, but with respect. She wasn't just an abandoned bride now. She was a woman who stood up to a man who had always towered over her confidence. And behind her, Tahanri stood like a mountain she hadn't known she could lean on or walk beside. When the riders finally disappeared over the ridge, swallowed by heat shimmer and distance, the camp released a collective breath that felt like it had been trapped in every chest for years, not minutes, and Lottie stood there shaking so hard she had to press both hands to her skirt to keep from folding to the ground. The fear still pulsed in her bones, hot and sour, but under it, braided through it, was something she had never felt before in the aftermath of humiliation. Pride, fragile and trembling, but real enough that when she met Henry's eyes, she didn't look down or away. The Apache giant studied her quietly, like a man seeing a sunrise he hadn't expected. "You stood," he said, "not as praise, not as a compliment, but as a simple truth delivered with reverence." Lottie swallowed, her voice unsteady. "I didn't feel brave." "Bravery is not a feeling," he replied. "It is a choice." She blinked fast, overwhelmed, shaking, a hand lifting instinctively to her chest, where her heartbeat thudded like hooves against the earth. "I thought I'd faint," she whispered. "Then faint," Henry said softly, "and still you stood. This is strength." A small, incredulous sound slipped from her lips, half sob, half laugh, because no one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever seen anything in her besides weight, softness, too muchness. She turned away before tears spilled, but Henry stepped closer. "Do not hide," he murmured. "Shame belongs to men who mock, not to you." His words struck so deeply she had to breathe through the ache. The older Apache woman approached, placing a calming hand on Lottie's shoulder. "Sit," she said gently. "Your spirit trembles." Lottie let herself be guided to the fire, sinking onto a woven mat as her legs wobbled from the confrontation and the adrenaline that still clawed at her ribs. A young girl brought her a cup of willow bark tea, fragrant and warm, and Lottie held it with both hands like an anchor. Across the fire, Henry remained standing, arms crossed, watching the road as if expecting the riders to return, his entire body humming with a readiness that made Lottie's breath shake. "Will they come back?" she asked quietly. He didn't turn. "If Wade has pride, yes." He has pride," she whispered. "Too much." "Then he will return with more men," Henry said simply. "So we prepare." The older woman clicked her tongue. "Let him send armies. They cannot take what does not wish to be taken." Lottie's hands tightened around the cup. She couldn't help the fear creeping in, the fear that she had brought trouble to these people who had showed her more kindness in one day than she'd received in years. "I should leave," she murmured, voice cracking, "before I bring danger to your tribe." Henry shook his head once, sharp and decisive. "You do not leave in fear." "But if they come for you," he said, stepping around the fire until he stood in front of her, "they come through me." She lifted her eyes at that, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between them, the fire, the hush of wind across the basin, his shadow falling over her like a vow made in silence. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk your people for me?" Henry's voice softened, dropping into something almost tender. "Because strength does not ignore the wounded," he said. "Because my tribe has long memories. We remember what it is to be hunted for being different, and because—" He paused, as though choosing his words from somewhere deep inside his chest. "Because you do not see your own value, so I will see it until you can." Lottie pressed her lips together as tears threatened again. "I don't know how to accept that," she murmured. "You do not accept," he said. "You learn." He crouched so they were eye to eye. "And you have already begun." She wiped at her cheeks, breath trembling. "I thought no one wanted me." "Then your world was too small," he said. "Open it." She stared at him, something shifting painfully inside, something old breaking, something new struggling to grow. Behind them, warriors began preparing, checking weapons, scouting the ridges. Women gathered supplies. The camp was moving not with fear, but with unity, because of her, because they had chosen to stand beside her. She looked around, overwhelmed by a truth she'd never dared imagine. Here, among these people, she wasn't an inconvenience. She wasn't a joke. She wasn't too much. She was exactly enough. Henry stood again, offering her his hand, not to lift her, not to force her, but simply to let her choose. "Come," he said. "You should see where you will stay tonight. It is safer by the red rock walls." Lottie took a shaky breath, feeling the exhaustion and trembling pride swirl inside her like embers catching wind. "Will you stay close?" she asked, embarrassed at her own vulnerability. But Henry didn't smile or mock. He simply nodded. "I will not leave." As she rose and followed him toward the sheltered alcove, her step still unsteady, but her heart steadier than it had been in years, she realized something she had never admitted before. She wasn't afraid of being unwanted anymore. She was afraid of finally wanting something and losing it. And as the Apache giant walked beside her, silent and strong, she wondered for the first time who she could become if she stayed. Night crept over the basin in a slow wash of indigo, the fire at the center of camp burning low and steady as if guarding the quiet breath of the Apache people settling into rest. But Lottie couldn't sleep despite the warm blankets and the soft hum of distant drums, her mind tangled in fear and the echo of Tahanri's words, "You stood," because standing up to Colby Tate had felt like ripping open a wound she'd carried for years. And now she lay awake, listening to the wind brush the hide walls of the lodge as her heart thudded too loud in her chest. She finally sat up, hugging her knees to steady her breath, and slipped outside into the cool night. The sky stretched enormous overhead, thick with stars that looked close enough to pluck from the heavens, and there at the edge of the firelight, Tahonri sat alone on a flat stone, sharpening a long obsidian blade with the patience of someone who'd learned to sharpen silence just as well. He looked up as she approached, not startled, not annoyed, just aware, as though he'd been waiting for her without admitting it. "You cannot sleep," he said softly. Lottie hesitated before lowering herself beside him, careful but drawn to his presence like warmth in winter. "I keep thinking about Wade's men," she whispered, "about what they're planning, about how I brought danger to your people." Tahonri shook his head slowly. "No. Danger finds us regardless of who arrives. We face it as we always have, together." His calm steadied her trembling hands. "What if they come tonight?" she whispered. He nodded toward the ridge. They watched the trails, no sign yet. But something in his tone felt off. Like he didn't fully believe calm would last much longer. Lottie swallowed. "I hate that all of this started because of me." "It did not start because of you," he said. "It started because men like Wade and Colby believe they own the world. You simply stopped letting them own you." Lottie's breath trembled at the truth of it. She opened her mouth to respond, but then a scream ripped through the camp, high and sharp and shattering, followed by the thunder of hooves and the explosive crack of a rifle. Tahonri was on his feet in an instant, pulling her behind him as shadows darted between the lodges, firelight flaring against metal and dust. "Stay down," he commanded, voice sharp now, battle-born. Lottie crouched behind a large stone as chaos erupted. Warriors grabbed spears, women rushed children into the shelter of the red rock alcoves. Dogs barked fiercely, and smoke rose where a torch had been thrown onto a lodge roof. A second shot rang out, closer this time. "They're here," Lottie gasped. "Wade sent more men." Tahonri didn't answer. He was already moving like a force of nature, shouting orders in Apache as he grabbed a second warrior's bow and slung it over his shoulder. The ridge glowed red, not from fire, but from the muzzle flashes of rifles firing down into the camp from above. "They took the high ground," Tahonri growled. "Cowards." Lottie's pulse slammed painfully. "What do I do?" "Stay hidden," he said, gripping her shoulders. "Do not run. Do not leave the shadows. I will come back." "No, wait!" But he was gone, sprinting toward the ridge with terrifying speed, disappearing behind boulders as warriors climbed after him. Lottie tried to steady her breathing, but the world had split open, gunfire echoing off stone, women crying out for their children, warriors answering with battle cries sharp enough to cleave the night. A bullet struck the dirt near her foot, and she flinched violently, crawling toward deeper cover when she heard a familiar voice shout from the ridge. "Find the bride! Wade wants her alive!" Her blood turned to ice. She pressed herself flat behind the stone as two shadows slipped between the lodges, searching, rifles ready. "Spread out," one hissed. "She's here somewhere." Lottie clapped a hand over her mouth to smother her breath. She could hear them, boots crunching dirt, curses under their breath, fire crackling louder as another torch landed on a lodge roof. Then, footsteps too close. A boot stopped inches from her hiding place. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Please, please, please!" A roar split the air. Tahonri came crashing into the intruders like a falling tree, blade flashing obsidian black under the moon as he knocked one man flat and kicked the other so hard he hit the lodge post behind him. "You will not touch her!" Tahonri thundered, voice like rolling storm. The men scrambled, one firing blindly as he crawled backward, but Tahonri drove him into the dirt with a crushing knee. "Run!" Tahonri warned the second man, "or stay and join him in the dust." The man fled. Tahunri grabbed Lottie's wrist, yanking her to her feet. "Come," he urged. "We must move. Your people are trained," he said, "but you are not." They sprinted toward the red rock alcove, where warriors were herding families to safety. A bullet whined past Lottie's ear, and she stumbled, gasping, but Tahunri caught her instantly, lifting her as if she weighed nothing and carrying her the last few yards before setting her gently behind the stone wall. "Stay here," he commanded, "no matter what you hear." She clung to his arm. "Please don't leave me." He paused. For the first time all night, fear flickered in his eyes, not fear for himself, but for her. "I will always return," he said softly. "That is my promise." "Why?" she whispered. Tahunri exhaled like a man revealing something he'd kept buried deep. "Because your life matters to me," he said. "More than I expected. More than I should admit." Before she could speak, another explosion cracked across the ridge, and he turned away, sprinting back into the storm of gunfire. Lottie watched him vanish into the night, her heart shattering with fear, awe, and a rising, overwhelming truth she couldn't fight anymore. She didn't want him to protect her because she was helpless. She wanted him to come back to her because she cared, because somewhere between shame and safety, she had begun to fall for the man who saw her worth before she ever dared to. The ridge finally quieted near dawn, not because peace had returned, but because exhaustion had forced violence to ebb, leaving only the low groans of the wounded, the smoldering hiss of burnt canvas, and the tremor of fear still shaking through Lottie's veins as she crouched behind the red rock wall with the other sheltered families, her fingers digging into the stone as if she could anchor Tahunri back to her by force of will. Every few seconds she caught herself listening for his footsteps, his breath, anything that hinted he was alive, because the last she'd seen of him was his silhouette climbing the ridge under a rain of bullets, his blade flashing once, twice, before disappearing into firelit smoke. And now the uncertainty gnawed at her with teeth sharper than fear. A young Apache mother beside her whispered soft prayers over her sleeping child, while an older warrior stood guard at the edge of the alcove, bow drawn, eyes burning with the furious vigilance that only comes from protecting family. Lottie wrapped her arms around herself, every muscle stiff, replaying Tahunri's last words. "Your life matters to me," over and over until they became a drumbeat inside her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the weight in his voice, but trusting anything so beautiful felt like picking up a fragile glass vessel with unsteady hands. People didn't say things like that to girls like her, not in her world. Yet, he had. And he had run back into danger because of it. The sky slowly peeled from black to gray, the edges of dawn creeping like hesitant fingers across the horizon, when footsteps suddenly echoed on the stone, heavy, uneven, dragging. Lottie jerked upright so fast she nearly fell. "Tahunri?" she whispered, breath breaking. For a moment she saw nothing but shadow. Then he emerged from the smoke like a figure carved from the night itself, limping, blood streaking his shoulder and arm, soot clinging to his braids, but standing tall, alive. She clapped a hand over her mouth to smother the sob that burst from her chest. Tahunri's eyes swept the alcove until they found her, and the instant he saw her, his shoulders sagged with relief so visceral it nearly dropped him to his knees. Lottie scrambled from behind the stone barrier and rushed to him before caution or dignity or fear could stop her, and when she reached him she didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around him, her cheek pressing against his chest despite the heat of his wounds, and for a heartbeat he stood stunned, breath caught before his arms wrapped around her with a slow, aching tenderness, as if every promise he'd made last night lived inside this single embrace. "You came back," she whispered, crying freely now. "You told me to," he murmured into her hair, breath ragged. She pulled back enough to look at him, wiping blood from his brow with trembling fingers. "You're hurt," she gasped. Tahunri shook his head slightly. "Not enough to keep me from you." The older woman rushed toward them with bandages and herbs, scolding Tahunri in rapid Apache as she pressed a cloth to his shoulder wound. Tahunri winced but didn't take his eyes off Lottie. Did they hurt anyone?" Lottie whispered. "Some," Tahunri said quietly. "But not like Wade hoped. We pushed them back." She swallowed, guilt twisting inside her. "Because of me." "No," he said firmly. "Because of Wade. Because of greed. Because some men do not accept when a woman chooses freedom. She lowered her gaze. I don't feel brave. You stood your ground, he said. You stayed when it was easier to run. You feared for others more than yourself. He cupped her cheek with one large, gentle hand. Fear does not erase bravery. Only cowards believe otherwise. She closed her eyes against the tears. I was so scared you wouldn't come back. I told you, Tahonri murmured, voice deep and raw. I returned to you. The words lodged in her heart like roots trying to take hold. Why? She asked, shakily but honestly. Why me? Tahonri inhaled slowly, as if the truth weighed more than the wound on his shoulder. Because when I saw you on that platform, he said, voice low and steady, the world looked away from you, but you did not look away from yourself. You held your suitcase even when your hands shook. You stood waiting for a man who didn't deserve you. You carried dignity heavier than your sorrow. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his thumb grazing her skin with a softness that halted her breath. You are strong, Lottie Mae, he said, stronger than the ones who mocked you. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. You see someone who isn't real, she whispered. I see what you hide, he corrected gently, and what you could be if you believed as I do. Her chest tightened. And what is that? Tahonri held her gaze without a flicker of doubt. A woman worth walking beside, worth standing for, worth returning to. Lottie felt herself break open, quietly, beautifully, painfully. Not because she was fragile, but because she had never been held in the truth of someone's admiration before. Behind them the camp stirred. Wounded were tended, debris cleared, the tribe reclaiming its ground. But in the space between her and Tahonri, time felt suspended, dawn painting his face gold as the wind carried smoke and the scent of sage through the air. What do we do now? She asked, voice barely audible. Tahonri brushed his knuckles along her jaw, a touch tender enough to make her knees weaken. Now, he said, you choose again. Choose what? Where you walk, he murmured, and who you walk with. She looked at his injured arm, his exhausted eyes, the fierce gentleness he'd shown since the moment he told her she would ride with him. And for the first time, she whispered a truth she'd never imagined saying aloud. I don't want to walk alone anymore. A slow, powerful warmth spread through his expression, softening the warrior into something almost reverent. Then you will not, he said. And as the first full beam of sunrise broke over the ridge, casting long shadows behind them and long possibilities ahead, Lottie understood that the woman left at the station was not the same woman standing here now. And the man who returned for her was not a rescuer, but a path she was finally ready to follow. The sun rose fully over the Red Grove Basin, burning away the last of the smoke until only thin gray ribbons curled upward, like ghosts releasing their final breath. And Lottie stood quietly beside Tahonri as the tribe gathered to assess the damage, her hand hovering near his uninjured arm in case he swayed or needed her support, though he pretended he didn't, even as blood seeped slowly through the bandage wrapped around his shoulder, even as exhaustion deepened the shadows under his eyes. The camp looked bruised but unbroken. 2 lodges collapsed from fire, several warriors limping with wounds, children clinging to their mothers with wide, frightened eyes. Yet everywhere Lottie looked, she saw strength instead of ruin, people helping one another, lifting, tending, rebuilding, as if danger had simply solidified their unity instead of fracturing it. Watching them stirred something in her chest, an ache, a longing, a bloom of disbelief that she, a woman left unwanted on a wooden platform yesterday morning, was standing in a circle of people who treated her like she mattered. Tahonri finished speaking with one of the elders before turning to her. You should eat, he said softly, though he was the one swaying slightly. You haven't eaten since last night. She shook her head. I'm not hungry. Lottie, he said, voice nudging, you must be strong. She met his eyes, saw the pain he was hiding, and her chest tightened. So must you, she whispered back. His brows lifted a fraction, impressed, maybe amused, but he didn't argue as she guided him toward a shaded bench near the creek, ignoring the prickle of nerves at touching him so boldly. He sat heavily, wincing, and she knelt beside him to recheck the bandage. The older woman from before joined her, handing over fresh cloth. You care for him well, the woman murmured. Lottie flushed. I'm just helping." The woman's eyes crinkled. "Some help comes from duty. Some comes from the heart." Lottie's breath snagged at that, but she didn't look up, focused instead on tying the bandage tighter as Tahonri watched her with a stillness that made her pulse thrum. "He will heal," the elder woman added gently. "But your path," she nodded at Lottie, "that must also be healed." Lottie sat back on her heels, hands shaking a little. "I don't know what my path is anymore." Tahonri's voice came low. "Yes, you do." She lifted her gaze, startled. His eyes held hers with that same quiet certainty he'd shown since the station, as if he could see truths she hadn't dared speak. "You choose," he said. "Not Wade, not townsfolk, not anyone who laughs at what they do not understand." She swallowed. I don't have anywhere to go." "Then choose where you want to go," he said. "Not where you think you belong." She looked away toward the ridge, where ashes drifted like dark snow, and the weight of yesterday, the humiliation, the fear, the fire, settled, crackling inside her. "If I stay here," she whispered, "Wade will come again." "Then we face him," Tahonri said simply. "But you owe him nothing." She dug her nails into her palms. "What if I bring more danger to your people?" "Danger comes whether you stand alone or with others," he replied. "But standing alone breaks you faster." Lottie's breath trembled. "You make it sound easy." "It is not easy," he said. "It is right." She closed her eyes, feeling a slow warmth spread through her ribs, something fierce and fragile all at once. When she opened them, Tahonri was still watching her, not blinking, not wavering. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why me? I'm not—" "Do not finish that sentence," Tahonri said sharply, surprising her. "You are not less. You are not burden. You are not shame." His voice softened, deepened. "You are a woman with heart big enough to stand in fear and still speak truth. That is rare. That is precious." She bit her lip, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to be treasured." "Then learn," he murmured, "with me or without me. But learn." The wind swept past them, carrying dust and the faint scent of crushed sage. Children's laughter slowly returned to the camp as the morning grew brighter, light catching the beads in Tahonri's braids, making him look both fierce and impossibly gentle. Lottie exhaled, a long, shaking breath that loosened the heaviness lodged in her chest since the moment Wade didn't show. "If I stay," she said cautiously, "if I choose this place, choose you, what happens then?" Tahonri's eyes softened with something that reached deeper than comfort. "Then you walk beside me," he said, "not behind, not as weight I carry, as path I choose." Her heart jolted like a spark catching dried grass. "And if I'm afraid, then I take your hand," he said, "until your fear grows smaller." The words broke something open inside her, something old and tender and starved. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from relief so great it made her chest ache. Tahonri reached forward, hesitated, asking permission without words, then brushed a tear from her face with the back of his fingers, touch soft as a breath. "Lottie Mae," he whispered, "what do you choose?" She looked at him long, deeply, painfully aware of the moment's weight. This wasn't a marriage proposal. This wasn't possession. This was the first time in her entire life someone was asking her, not ordering her, not mocking her, asking her what she wanted. She inhaled, shaky and full. "I choose," her voice almost broke, "I choose not to go back." Tahonri's expression flickered, relief, pride, something like devotion. "And beyond that?" She stared at him, at the man who had seen her when no one else had, who stood for her when no one ever had, who returned bleeding rather than break a promise. Her heart steadied. "I choose to stay," she whispered. His breath left him like a vow released. He reached out, gently took her hand in his, and for the first time, maybe in her whole life, Lottie felt chosen not out of pity, not out of convenience, but out of genuine respect and something deeper she dared not name yet. As the Red Grove people gathered to greet the new day, Lottie Mae realized she wasn't the woman left behind at a train station anymore. She was the woman who had chosen her own story, and the giant beside her. He was the beginning of it. Do you think love grows from being rescued, or from finally seeing your own worth? If this story touched you, Like, share, and subscribe to Redemption West for more old frontier tales of courage, mercy, and becoming who you were meant to be.